Welcome to Akasha Talks, a podcast on consciousness, healing, and different ways to interact and weave those together, both old and new, to be able to get the most out of your life. I'm your host, Lance Baker, coming to you from Newcastle, Australia. Hope you kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. Welcome back, Matt Dragonstone.
Hi. How you doing, man?
Good. I can't believe it's been a year since we've been Zoom to Zoom, but we've had plenty of time face to face over this year. But welcome back.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, it's been good to actually meet you face to face this year, which is a good, which is a difference because we've only ever done Zoom before. But you've come down to sunny Melbourne, and we've met.
We did, although I'm not sure what universe sunny Melbourne was in. But anyway, there was some moments.
Yeah, true indeed.
So, we've had you on a bunch of times. For those who haven't been listening in before, Matt is an astrologer in Melbourne. And a few years ago, I got the shits with all the astrology stuff being about America. And I said, hey, Matt, is there any chance you could do a reading for a year ahead for Australia? So for my listeners outside of Australia, I'm sorry, but the gist will be vaguely similar in some ways. There'll be some world things maybe, but the focus of what Matt and I are going to be chatting about today is what the stars say the little lucky country we're on is going to look and feel like for the next year.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's and the lucky country. I'm loving that. That's going to be the motif, I think, for this year, for this reading. Yeah.
Good. So my astrology knowledge for the year ahead is extremely limited. I listened to Austin Gordon's first half of the year, and that's the only thing I've known about the astrology. So most of this is going to be Matt monologuing and me prodding him.
I'll need you to interrupt with some comic relief just to raise the tone a bit because it's a heavy year.
There you go, everybody. Brace yourself for a heavy year. I did know that from talking about before. But heavy years make strong people and hopefully a strong country. Let's see.
Yeah, let's see.
3 octaves higher there. I don't think that sounds good.
I'm going to end up speaking like a chipmunk by the end of this and just trying not to commit to too much darkness.
Okay. So, when actually, before we get into what the year brings, is there anything you want to bring up about what you remember saying about last year? Before we get into it. I can't even remember what you said.
Well, look, I mean, mundane astrology is like any kind of predictive divinatory practice, right? In that you can kind of get the target. The target might be pinpoint in terms of what you've said is going to happen. But if you get within 5% of that, then you're doing all right. And I think the big highlight that I recall from last time was the tariffs. And I didn't call them tariffs by name. I didn't describe them as tariffs, but I did notice that the prediction from last time around trade relations with other countries being difficult around March, April.
I do remember that.
Seems to have landed, and it took the form of tariffs, and it just about took me out with my talisman business because the bulk of my customers are in the United States, and it sort of ground to a halt at the worst possible time. But you know, that's sort of life, isn't it? When I should have known better. But I think that was the big highlight. Didn't really comment on the election last time because I couldn't see the forest for the trees, basically. I was very much into the granular analysis of the ingress charts and paid no attention to the fact that there was a federal election last year at the beginning. So kind of forgot about it, but just as well because Albo survived. We have Albo for at least another couple of years, And as far as I know, there are no federal elections this year, so I don't have to worry about making that mistake again.
Okay.
But
So, with the reading forward for this year, when does this year start?
well, we've got to do the usual thing, and I think this is the third time we've done the Aussie Astro thing. So just to give your new listeners some context and to refresh your loyal listeners' memories, when we do mundane astrology, there's a number of ways of performing natal chart analyses for countries or corporations or big bodies of legislative collections. And there's a way that involves looking at the ingress of the sun into the cardinal signs for the year ahead. And I like to start, rather than going from Aries, which is in March of this year, I like to start from Capricorn. So to start reading for 2026, we have to do a bit of a Melbourne hook turn and go left to go right, and start back in December when the sun entered Capricorn. And we look at the sun entering Capricorn at the exact moment, which is the same for everybody the world over, but we take it from the location of the legislative capital of the country that we're analysing. So for Australia, that's Canberra, and we're going to look at 5 charts this time. We're going to look at Capricorn 2025, which kind of marks the rough beginning of this 12-month period in Canberra, and what that chart looks like in terms of its ascendant, its midheaven, and the house placements of all the major players. And then we're going to look at Aries, same deal in Canberra, and then Cancer, and then Libra, and then again at Capricorn to sort of round out more or less a calendar year. So that's kind of how we're going to do it. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Sweet as. Cool. Well, let's kick off. And just I always ask this every year: is this video or audio? Are you on video
Both.
yet? Both.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. I'll share my screen, including my hastily written notes in Notepad. And we'll start off with the Australia chart. So what we're doing is we're looking at the chart for Australia. We're examining Australia at a federal level. And in order to do that, we need to find the moment that Australia was quote unquote born, right? And it's an interesting thing. I think in the first forecast episode we spoke about the conditions under which Australia was born and why we're using the 1st of January 1901 in Sydney at Centennial Park at 1:35 p.m. And we're using that as the chart for Australia. And we'll look at the ingress charts for Canberra because that's the current legislative capital. And we might even do a little bit of a comparison for certain moments in the year when we're going to see some of the, I guess, the promises contained in each ingress chart playing out in terms of Australia and in terms of the natal chart for Australia, in air quotes. I'm doing air quotes for the listeners. So we're looking at Australia, we're looking at a Capricorn nation with an Aries ascendant, very important for this year. We're looking at a nation with a packed 9th house by nativity, meaning relations with foreign countries, very, very important. And we're also looking at a nation with a 2nd house moon and Cancer ruling the 4th house. So the 4th house, which is the land, the big institutions and the natural resources of the country, ruled from the 2nd house with a moon in Taurus. And we've got the ascendant in Aries, ruled from the 6th house with Mars in Virgo. So that's going to all make a bit more sense when we start looking at the ingress charts. And we'll start with Capricorn for 2025. So 22nd of December, 2025, 2:02 a.m., daylight time in Canberra. That's the moment when, for Australia, the sun entered Capricorn and kicks off the story for this year. And straight off the bat, we've got basically the tone of the next 12 months, as far as I can tell, set for us here. So when we're looking at the natal charts, we're looking at the house placement of the sun, the house placement of the moon, and the ascendant, the placement of the ascendant's ruler, And that's a good place to start in terms of just sketching out the beginning stages of the story of 2026. Okay, so what we've got immediately is we've got the sun in Capricorn, obviously. We've also got the moon in Capricorn in the fourth house. And we've got the sun forming a conjunction and applying conjunction to Mars in Capricorn. So we've got a bit of a fourth house Capricorn party going on. And when we look at mundane astrology, we have similar kinds of house delineations as we do in natal astrology, but in mundane, the fourth house means the land, the actual country itself, crops, natural resources, buildings, weather, and the people. And this is an interesting collection of significations that we're going to see repeated in other ingress charts. The emphasis on the fourth house, the emphasis on land, crops, natural resources, buildings, weather, and the people. So the thing I can tell you about this chart is that we've got a focus on the country itself, and we've got a martial and saturnine focus on the country itself. We have Mars in there. Mars is ruling the descendant in this chart. The ascendant is in Libra, and the descendant is 180 degrees away in Aries, and it's ruled by Mars in the fourth house, which is super interesting. And the Sun and Mars and the Moon in Capricorn are ruled by Saturn in the sixth house, which is equally interesting because the sixth house, which is in charge of this Capricorn party because it has Saturn in it, the sixth house Saturn there in Pisces is in a house that delineates public health, epidemics, the military, civil service, workers and employees, and labor unions. So we start off the year with an emphasis on the land and also on the natural resources, with Mars there, ruled by a planet that's in a house traditionally, that implicates the military. And that's kind of the bubbling subterranean surface underneath the ascendant. We take the six houses underneath the ascendant as kind of subterranean, so to speak, that kind of influences our public image from Capricorn through to the Aries ingress in March. The midheaven is in Cancer, and thank God Jupiter in Cancer is there as well in the 10th house. And the midheaven in mundane astrology represents our public image, basically, how we're presenting ourselves on the world stage. So the moon is ruling the midheaven from the fourth house. So our public image is very much taken up with our land, our resources, our crops, our buildings, and the people of Australia. We have that kind of focus from the global eye of Sauron upon us until March. And that's kind of coloured and flavoured a little bit by the co-presence of the Sun and also Mars. So we've got this dialogue starting immediately, which is, what's the land like down there in Australia? What are the crops like? What's the weather pattern like? Let's take a closer look. And so we've got this focus on who we are in our land, which kind of repeats itself in further charts. Interestingly, the ascendant, 23 degrees Libra, very close to a fixed star called Speaker, which I quite like, kind of denotes a bit more of a diplomatic approach. We're sort of a little bit tentative. The people represented by the moon in Capricorn, Capricorn moons don't tend to sort of have the best time emotionally. It's not a kind of strong placement for the moon. But when we look at, the way in which we're handling this focus on the country itself as a landmass, we're approaching things quite tentatively and diplomatically. And thankfully, like I said, we've got Jupiter in Cancer in the 10th house, very close to the midheaven. And that's kind of going to be our saving grace, I think, for the first 3 months of 2026.
Yeah.
So how's that sitting with you so far?
So far, I'm getting the feeling that Australia's going to repeat its patterns of like giving away our resources for next to nothing.
Yeah. Giving away is interesting. I'd agree with you if it wasn't for Mars in a really strong position in the fourth house, ruled by the presence of Saturn in the sixth house. and Saturn very close to Neptune in the sixth as well. I think we're sort of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is part of the 2026 kind of astrological landscape, is about disillusionment, really. The meeting of Saturn and Neptune together can be described as the realistic, the intervention of reality into a dreamscape. And if we've got the sun and the moon and Mars all ruled from the sixth house, I think we're kind of going to spend the first couple of months this year waking up a little bit and stepping a little bit out of a dream state where, you know, for various reasons, not mentioning any particular ones, although we've had we've had a little bit of difficulty finding our way in reality on the global stage, and I think we're suddenly going to wake up to our vulnerabilities, because the moon in Capricorn is vulnerable. That's what the moon in Capricorn kind of, you know, can be described as, right? Fragile, vulnerable. And that martial presence there, and the fact that these three planets are ruled from the sixth house, which is the military and the public service, I think we're going to start to see, on the one hand, with the ascendant in Libra, a diplomatic approach to kind of gauging other nations' interests in our land. And also on the other end, underneath the ascendant-descendant axis, quite a panicked kind of fear-driven response to upping our defenses. We're going to see a bit more military spending in the next kind of, 3 months or so. Lots of news about that, basically. Yeah. And, my other explanation for that too is that with Libra on the ascendant, Scorpio rules the second house, which is where the money is, basically, for the country. And that's ruled by Mars in the fourth house.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I've been thinking as well about, the Capricorn ingress and just generally how that relates to the chart that we've got. And I think in previous years, we've seen a heavy emphasis on the third house, which is communication and, all sorts of significations around communication, roads, rail, pipelines, news and the media, the internet, post office and neighboring nations. And the Libra ascendant for the Capricorn ingress chart is ruled by Venus. Venus is in Sagittarius in the third house, along with Mercury. And I feel like even though we've got this kind of spending, we're just going to be kind of using that Venusian influence over our ascendant to, shore up those diplomatic relations, but also at the same time focus a little bit further on, how we're going to defend ourselves in terms of our communication. How are we going to manage the message around what we're actually doing when it comes to communicating to our own people? And one of the big significators that I've seen in recent sort of weeks has been that social media ban for under 16s. Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. My kids, thank God, are too young to be on social media anyway.
Yes.
But I'm sure all the 14-year-olds have already found a way to access social media through a VPN. But at the very least, we have that emphasis continuing from previous years on communication pathways and channels of communication and how we can kind of, manage those, so to speak.
Yeah. Do you remember what date that kicked in?
I don't actually. I might just Google it now. Why not? While I'm sharing screens, I'll just Google it.
It was close to that time.
It was close to that time. Hang on. Social media ban Australia for under 16s. Okay. I'm pretty sure it was December the 10th. It was December the 10th that the legislation was passed. So in the last kind of period, basically. But I've as we see that bedded in, and as that kind of trickles down and we get all sorts of strange scenarios that kind of come into play, we're probably going to see that sort of, I guess, I don't know, somehow factoring into our diplomatic ties with other nations, like the fact that we ban our children from social media. But also, I guess, on a more sinister note, how we manage our communication channels as well. As in, like, this is what we do in Australia. We can ban people from social media. We can also regulate the internet quite closely if we need to, maybe in a bid to attract the kind of partners that we want relative to our vulnerabilities as a nation.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's kind of the first 3 months of 2026. They're a little bit disturbing until we get to Aries, which is even more disturbing.
Like, this is the bit you're telling me to brace myself for.
Yeah. All right. So just remember, folks, we've got an emphasis on the fourth house. We've got Sun, Mars, and Moon all in the fourth house in the Capricorn chart. If we flash forward to, here we go. If we flash forward to March of 2026, we see the same house being highlighted, but under very different circumstances. So we've got an absolute rager of a party in number 4 Australia Street, house number 4. And there's really nobody in charge at this stage. So we've got the same things that we were looking at before. The sun and the moon are still in the fourth house. And it's not only the sun and the moon this time. Mars is kind of ruling the Aries ingress from the third house. But we've got Sun, we've got Neptune, we've got Saturn, we've got Venus, we've got the Moon, and also Chiron, which I like to include just because I like the asteroid. But these are like at least 4 big traditional factors, or at least 3 big traditional factors that we've got, plus these 2 additional outer planets, all in the fourth house, all in Aries, and all ruled by Mars, which is just over the fence in number 3. Along with the North Node and Mercury, just getting ready to have a little party of their own. And yeah, what do you think of that, Lance? You've been doing this long enough; you can decipher.
That sounds like we're talking about picking fights or defending ourselves in a bunch of different categories about our people, or with our people, or about our land.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember back from the very first time we did this, when you did the reading on Australia, of what the country's chironic wound was.
Yeah, Jesus Christ! I'm going to have to bring up the chart and just double check where Chiron was when as a nation we were born. Chiron's the 9th house, right? Our chironic wound. In terms of nativity in the Australian natal chart, Chiron is in the 9th house, and it's also co-present with, I'm just going to try and move this screen, also co-present with Mercury, also co-present with Jupiter and Uranus and Venus. And, Mercury and Chiron together, I mean, I think our national wound is our accent and our, the way we handle the English language. But on a on a slightly more sort of, serious note, Chiron and Mercury are, in opposition to Neptune in the 3rd house, right, in the Australian natal chart, right? So we've got this built in, which is Chiron standing in opposition to Neptune and standing very close to Mercury. And, from the 9th house to the 3rd house. So our comms channels, our communication channels, and then also the ways in which we handle 3rd house topics kind of contribute to the national wound that we deal with. And it's interesting to see that kind of echoed a little bit in the Aries ingress chart for Canberra, with, the 3rd house implicated the ruler of the 4th house, where we're finding our sun and moon, in the 3rd house, and all of this action just completely putting the spotlight on the land, the natural resources, the crops, this time in a far more martial way, and all of that tying in the house next door, which is number 3, where Mars, the ruler of number 4, is currently at. Plus, we've got Mercury and the North Node both together in the 3rd house. So that's just the beginning of the Aries ingress. And what we're seeing around that time, 21st of March, is that kind of beginning of the Aries pileup, right? That's going to happen just a couple of weeks later, around the middle of April, where Mars and Mercury also join the party, so to speak. So within the context of this ingress chart, which has a cardinal ascendant, is only valid for 3 months, we have to redo it again in the Cancer ingress. We've got all of this action just focused intently on not only the land and the crops and the people and the natural resources, but the stories we're telling ourselves about that, and the ways in which the communication channels and the roads and the shipping lanes and the things that we use for domestic travel, and here's where we talk about airplane travel, start to start to get hyper martial, hyper martial. Yeah. And not only that, we've got a Capricorn ascendant for this chart, and we have Capricorn obviously ruled by Saturn, and Saturn's in the fourth house. In fact, when we look at the rulerships of the houses, pretty much everything's ruled by either ruled from either the third house or the fourth house. So just to go around the circle, the ascendant and the second house. So the nation's kind of modus operandi and the nation's spending are both ruled by Saturn. Saturn's in the fourth house. We've got the third house, which is ruled, thank God, by Jupiter, and Jupiter's still quite strong at this stage, 15 degrees of Cancer in the seventh house, so that's okay. But we've got the fourth house ruled by the third. We've got the fifth house ruled by the fourth. We've got the sixth house ruled by the third. We've got the seventh house ruled by the fourth. We've got the eighth house ruled by the fourth. We've got the ninth house ruled by the third. We've even got the midheaven and the 10th house ruled by the fourth. It's all just about hunkering down. The 11th house ruled by the third. The 12th house ruled by the seventh. It's all about hunkering down, right? And battening down the hatches and putting ourselves relative to this big pile-up that everyone's talking about with the global predictions and the other sort of 2026 forecasts from the perspective of, Aries governing, the land, the crops, the people, the natural resources. It's very martial, very hyper martial. And then just a couple of weeks later, Mercury and Mars join the party in number 4, and we get everything focused in this chart, at least, on the land. And if we overlay this chart with the national chart, with the natal chart, which I'm going to do now, and I'll try and describe this as best I can for the audio listeners. If we put the the nation's chart on one side, and we put all of the planetary placements in terms of the Aries ingress in March on the outside, we get a big focus on the national identity. We get a huge focus on the first house, right, in the nation's chart. So in the ingress chart, it's all happening in the fourth, which is the land, the people, etc. In the national chart, all of this big pile up in Aries is happening in number 1. And, the vibe in terms of predictions generally for this year, has echoes of 2020. And when I think back to 2020, when there was such a huge pile up of planets in Capricorn, that was happening in the 10th house of our national chart and affected our national identity on the world stage, how we were viewed from afar. With the Aries ingress, what we've got is that big collection of planetary energies just hitting the first house of the national chart and changing the way we do things, albeit for just, hopefully a couple of months until the Cancer ingress, but more likely with all of the factors in play and the particular planetary energies that are happening, kind of diverting the way the nation works, maybe permanently. That's going to be my big call, right?
Okay.
So you mentioned plane travel. Just switching back to the Aries ingress chart, all of this fourth house action ruled from the third house. Domestic air travel, I like to put in the third house rather than the ninth house. It kind of makes sense. Australia's huge, and so the domestic air travel thing is quite a prominent part of how we get around with our short trips. I think we're going to see some sort of stoppage to domestic air travel, if not international air travel, around March, April, just simply because of the factors in play with a stationary, Mercury in the first decan of Pisces. Mercury doesn't particularly like being in Pisces. We've got a conjunction to the North Node, which brings chaos. And we've got Mars just going, no way are we going to do this. It's too much of a threat. We're in threat response mode,
Yeah.
Saturn's ruling the ascendant from the fourth. We're a little bit kind of cagey around March and April about the security of the land that we live on, so the security of the nation. That would obviously have ramifications for air travel, but is also going to potentially impact interstate and inter-city travel as well, if that kind of vibe continues, particularly as we enter into April and May. So, Aries is where it's at. The Aries ingress chart sets the proper scene. We get rumblings in the lead up during Capricorn to Aries, and then all of a sudden Aries hits, and we're like, oh shit, okay. shit got
So
real.
maybe like in the COVID lockdowns, I went up to Queensland and there was like the big border protection thing, and I had to like have a pass and an ID and all the rest. And then when I come back, New South Wales didn't give a shit. And they're like, whatever.
Yeah, pretty much. I wouldn't know I was in Melbourne, just not allowed to leave my room, let alone my house. So yeah, but all jokes aside, it's a pretty intense kind of period, March, April, and globally, everyone's going to feel this in one way or another. The American ingress charts don't look amazing. And, you know, we've got sort of, you know, Great Britain, which has the same ascendant. England has the same ascendant, at least, as Australia. So we're probably going to see some sort of impact that crosses that Commonwealth divide, so to speak, and kind of hits us down here. And this is the kind of chart that speaks to me about a kind of fear response that sort of, you know, I guess generates the motivating factors for our actions, legislatively and otherwise. You know, for the next 3 months, it really can't be understated how important this period is for the nation's history, and definitely for the nation's sort of pathway through 2026.
Okay.
Yeah. There's some good news in this though, which is
There is.
yeah. So we've got sort of, you know, Mars is under the control of Jupiter, so you know there is that kind of seventh house emphasis, right? Which is that sort of diplomatic relationships with other nations where there's trade relations. So I feel like what this is going to do, and not forgetting that the third house is also the house of the nation's neighbors as well, so the countries immediately bordering or close to the nation. What this is going to do is probably, again, save our ass. Jupiter's still there in Cancer at the Aries ingress, offering some saving grace, but with the way that astrological aspects work, you know, a lot of this Aries action, at least by sign, is going to be in an overcoming square to Jupiter anyways. So we might have positive relations diplomatically with other nations. Definitely our midheaven is kind of pointing somewhat in that direction, albeit ruled from Venus in the fourth house. But, you know, I mean, it's not going to be that much of a saving grace. We're going to come through more or less okay, just probably shut down. And, you know, at least the rumblings on a federal level are going to be felt legislatively throughout the country for the rest of the year. But, you know, Jupiter can only do so much. It's kind of keeping Mars under wraps before it goes apeshit in the middle of April, you know, and sort of leaves Jupiter's rulership. But, you know, at least for the Aries ingress, we can see a lot of stuff, just crazy, crazy times happening in Canberra, and just the very thinnest thread of good luck helping us out. And that's kind of that lucky country vibe that I keep banging on about every time we meet up, where it's like, that's not a that's not a boastful poem, it's a fucking warning. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we move into Cancer.
Yeah. Yes, we do. God,
Does that get nicer?
it's a nervous laugh, folks. I'm not a sadist. It's either laugh or keep talking in higher octaves. All right, so here we are in Cancer. We've switched up, okay? Second half of 2026, not that focused on land, not that focused on fourth house stuff, not even that focused on third house stuff. We see a little bit of an array of, you know, the planets just kind of moving out of that big stellium in Aries, which is, thank God for that, right? And once again, thank God for Jupiter still being in Cancer, because we're looking at the Cancer ingress, and we've got the Sun in the seventh house this time, and we've got Mercury in the seventh house forming a conjunction to Jupiter. And so we've got a little bit more bonification of that house through the presence of Jupiter for the Cancer to Libra sort of end of 2026, so that sort of Q3 2026. But, you know, there's still that kind of residue of the Aries eruption in our fourth house, because the ascendant for the Cancer ingress chart is Capricorn, 19 degrees of Capricorn in Canberra on the 21st of June at 6:24 p.m. And so we've got Saturn ruling the ascendant, and of course ruling the ascendant from the fourth house. So there's still that kind of bedding down of I guess, Saturnine authority that's impacting the way that we do stuff from the fourth house. So the good thing about Aries versus Capricorn, and the good thing about 2026 versus 2020 is that whereas 2020 was quite long and had a long tail in terms of its impacts, 2026, the Aries impact will be short, sharp, traumatic, but kind of will move on a little bit, just a little bit from March when we get to June. So ascendant ruled from the fourth house, Saturn's in Aries. Saturn's going to be in Aries for the next 2.5 years. It doesn't like being in Aries. I've been thinking a bit about Saturn in Aries and what that means lately, and I've come to the conclusion that it's forced to act too quickly. Saturn's an old man,
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
And, I'm not saying that I'm Methuselah or anything like that, but as I get older, I don't like being rushed, Lance. I don't know about you.
No.
I like to take my time and just kind of warm up before I commit to things. Now imagine that you're like several billion years old and you're Saturn and you're just this old man figure that's all of a sudden pushed into a youthful sign. And, if we represent sort of the legislation and the law and justice, etc., through Saturn, and we've got that ruling the ascendant from the fourth house and it's in a youthful sign and it's being rushed, then, old men who are rushed tend to get really pissed off and angry. Old men who are rushed tend to get very cantankerous. And they tend to just make blanket decisions for the hell of it, just to do something as a means to, you know what I mean? Like, if I'm too rushed in traffic, getting to work, not as an old man, but as a getting old man, I tend to just go, oh, fuck it, I'll just take the side street because it's here and it's open and I want to get to work. And that's never a good idea in Melbourne, particularly in Brunswick where I live, where, everything's just very slow moving. If we think about that sort of legislatively at a federal level, our ascendant is ruled by an old man who's being on a skateboard, basically, unsure on his feet, absolutely hammering down Brown Street. You know what I mean? Like, not sure how this is going to go, kind of relying on his wits and a little bit of luck. And that's kind of the modus operandi for Australia. A pissed off old man in fluoro quick dry boardies and a sideways Von Zipper hat, something like that. So yeah, that's kind of where the ascendant is. But thankfully what we've got is we've got a moon in the ninth house, 23 degrees of Virgo. And that moon is ruling the sun, it's ruling Jupiter, it's ruling Mercury, all in the seventh house. So the ninth house and the seventh house intimately linked. The fourth house and the first house, we're still a bit cagey and defensive because we've been woken up too early and forced out of bed. But we've got seventh house, ninth house working together, and obviously seventh house diplomatic trade relations with other nations. We're going to see that being quite prominent from June until September, October, when we get the Libra ingress. And that's going to be predominantly foreign countries, not necessarily neighboring countries. We're kind of looking more towards good old America, and we're also looking towards, England and Great Britain, the UK generally, for what it's worth. They're not going to be in a good way themselves, so it could be a bit of give and take there.
Yep. So this could be us helping them out more than them helping us out.
I think so personally, yeah. And, if I had to sum up what I'm seeing so far, I'm seeing some sort of threat to national sovereignty kind of either actually occurring in the first 3 months of 2026 or very close to occurring, Bay of Pigs style, by at least, the middle of April. And that kind of waking us up, snapping us out of the dream state and forcing us to, I guess, come to new terms and new arrangements with the foreign nations that represent us globally, like, United States, the UK, possibly even Canada. Let's throw that in there as well. Canada's a Cancerian nation, just like the US. But we've got that kind of scenario happening where we're like, let's shore up our alliances here. We need to get on a war footing pretty quick. And let's make sure we're still in good terms. And as a result of that, Australia has a lot of natural resources. Australia has a lot of cash. We'll probably be giving and taking. That's kind of the nature of that period from June to September, October, right? Jupiter in the seventh house makes us generous. Mercury ruling the moon ruling Mercury It's definitely got a technological aspect to it. We have a mutual reception here between Mercury and the Moon, both at 23 degrees of their respective signs. So we've got a kind of technological and also, in a sense, tangible material kind of wealth transfer thing going on as well. The midheaven ruled by Venus in Leo in the eighth house, and in a secondary sense ruled by the Sun in the seventh. So it's all about how can we buy what we need, and how can we sort of buy our way into better diplomatic relations with our allies. I personally feel that with so much emphasis at the start of the year on the fourth house, we're probably going to see increased military presences in Australia from other nations, most likely the UK, and most likely, if it comes to it, the United States, although I feel like they're going to be more focused on the Middle East. But we might start to see a bit of the echoes of World War II, where we had a lot of foreign servicemen stationed over here, mainly for the Pacific Theatre. But something along those lines. America's having a very World War II return moment in 2026 with Uranus entering Gemini, and some of those conjunctions which happen just after the Cancer ingress. We get Mars and Uranus in Gemini conjoined for the first of 3 times. So I think we're going to see a little bit of that strange backwards facing, kind of repeat of foreign troops on our soil, but friendly ones rather than antagonistic ones.
There are friendly ones and antagonistic ones, but that can also paint a big target for us.
It could. And so with bated breath, and just to remind everyone that, Mars by this stage, 24 degrees of Taurus, slow moving, but also not a nice place for Mars. Saturn's not having a good time. Mars isn't having a good time. And they both rule, they kind of have a role in ruling both the fourth house and the first house. So we're going to be, we're going to be a bit tentative. So we look forward to Libra, and I'll just quickly bring that chart up now.
Before we go there, is it at least a positive with like Saturn being in the fourth that maybe our crops go really well?
You would think so, Lance. You would.
But no.
But no. Saturn in the fourth for the Aries ingress, Saturn in the fourth for the Cancer ingress. And I'm just trying to remember, just quickly, I'll look at Capricorn. We didn't get Saturn in the fourth for the Capricorn ingress, thank God. But look, Aries and Cancer, in Australia, that's kind of autumn and winter. It's sort of harvest season, I think, for wheat and things like that. Very much a fourth house signification. I think our crops are going to be really fucking copping it, and I think the weather is going to be shit.
Okay, great.
Just to sprinkle a bit of that on top. I don't think we're going to have a big wheat crop that year. I don't think we're going to have a big, a staple foodstuff crop that year. Right? I don't think we're going to have a very good season when it comes to things like fires, particularly around Aries season. Because with that,
I feel like fires are going to be fucked this year.
I mean, we're waiting for the next big, fuck off fire season to happen. Like the last time, funnily enough, was 2019. Of course, how quickly we forgot about that. But it's usually the end of the year. It's usually summer, right, that we start to see the fire dangers. But I think the weather is going to be so shit, and so like the summer isn't necessarily going to be prolonged, but there's going to be unpredictable weather patterns that around Aries ingress time, the whole place could literally catch on fire. And so, make of that as what you will. Weather awful, crops not doing the best, really, even with Jupiter in Cancer, which is traditionally really good for crops. I think we've got too many factors that overcome Cancer from Aries to make a good season, a good harvest, dependable, so to speak. Luckily, for the most part, the sixth house, which governs food, and to a certain extent, the moon, which governs the food of the nation, isn't that impacted, but I just don't think it's going to be a good time for our farmers in the first sort of 6 to 9 months of 2026. Sorry, guys. I'm just the messenger. Don't shoot me or anything.
Aussie farmers are used to the rough end of the stick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, they're going to get a pretty rough shake next year, unfortunately. So let's continue the good news party. Here we are at Libra. Okay, things are a bit better. Libra, things shift a little bit better. We don't have Saturn in the fourth house, for instance. We don't have a cardinal ascendant. So for Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, we had a cardinal ascendant, which means things move so quick that it's ridiculous. But for Libra, we have a mutable ascendant, which, you know, in terms of what this means for mundane interpretations of a chart, if your ascendant is mutable, it's good for the next 6 months. So I think by the time we get to Libra season, so, you know, September 23rd and on for the rest of the year, the stage has been set. All the actions happened in the first kind of 3 to 4 months of the year. We've got a little bit of a new operating system, and we've got a little bit of help. So, you know, Sagittarius ascendant, it's ruled by Jupiter in the ninth house, and Jupiter's forming a trine to the ascendant in the Libra ingress chart. The sun is in the 11th house, and the moon is again in the third house, right? So again, lots of impact on the third house. But when we get to Libra, we've got the 11th house sun, which is about parliament and legislatures and city councils and different types of legislation that is powered by democratic rather than executive function within a government. And also our friends, the friends of a nation as well. So Libra, ruled by Venus and co-present with Mercury. So we're going to see that kind of techno aspect to it as well. Mercury's forming a trine to the moon in Aquarius, a very humanitarian sign in the third house. Again, emphasis on telecommunication, transportation, roads, rail, pipelines, news and media, the post office and neighboring nations. We've got a kind of legislative shift that's kind of passing, you know, Parliament, upper, lower house and Senate, that's kind of geared towards, I guess, maybe even a popular reaction to the first 4 months of 2026 and is more about accommodating the people into the new legislative framework. It's still something that's kind of ruled over by the Sun, and Mercury are both ruled by Venus. Venus is in Scorpio. Why not? You know, Venus doesn't particularly like being in Scorpio. It's in the 12th house. So the corruption and the perturbation of you know, that legislation will continue as it always has. But the stories that we're telling each other about this is going to be very much like, let's band together as a nation. Let's collectively come together around September or thereabouts, and certainly for the rest of the year and into 2027. Let's collectively respond. Let's collectively legislate. Let's collectively start to form an identity that takes into account the presence of foreign nations, because the ascendant is ruled from the ninth house. And the ninth house has Jupiter, not necessarily strong or weak in Leo, but definitely, you know, I'm looking at sort of the south lunar node here as well, being in the ninth house along with the ascendant ruler. So I feel like we're going to kind of, by, you know, September to October, if we were ever going to lose a bit of sovereignty as a nation, either in a soft way or in a really sort of harsh, quick way, we're going to start to see that legislation changing to accommodate a kind of erosion of our sovereignty towards the last 3 months of the year. And, you know, my reasoning for that is that, you know, Libra ruled from the 12th house. Okay, we've got the same kind of hidden shadowy powers that influence legislation anyway, but the ascendant ruled from the ninth house and ruled by a kind of generous disposition towards ninth house signifiers, which is foreign nations, and also the co-presence of the south lunar node makes me feel like there's loss associated with that. We're losing. We're kind of giving something up in a way that doesn't have a commensurate return on investment for us. We're going to have to like give shit away, which isn't great. And we're going to be telling ourselves a big old line of bullshit about how this is something we all want and we're all happy about, and let's band together to kind of make sure that this is enshrined in law all of a sudden.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, that's Libra. And because of that, that Sagittarius ascendant, we can kind of assume this chart is valid for 6 months at least. Things kind of calm down a little bit. We don't see as much emphasis on action. We don't necessarily have big, hard angles to, you know, the ascendant, for instance. And the sun, while in an opposition, an applying opposition to Neptune in the 5th house, you know, and the moon in an opposition to Jupiter in the 9th, you know, it's sort of, the opposition isn't a fast-moving transit. The square is a fast-moving transit. We saw a lot of that. The conjunction, obviously, very fast-moving. But oppositions tend to take their time to work themselves out. And it's all about finding balance. Funnily enough, for Libra season, it's all about finding balance, harmony, accord, and kind of shoring up our friendships with other nations. So very specifically, the 11th house, friends of the nation. Right? Who are our new friends? And let's see how we can kind of come out of this more or less unscathed. And that kind of sets the scene for the next 6 months and then into 2027. So that's the bones of it.
Yeah.
If you're still listening, well done. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing next year, man. It's not amazing.
Doesn't sound super uplifting.
No. And I think that there's a kind of deeper narrative here as we track the role of Saturn through all of these charts, and we sort of have the big aspect that's been forming for a while now, which is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and how that's kind of got a role to play throughout all the charts that we've looked at so far for 2026. Saturn, Neptune together in Aries, right? 0 degrees Aries is when the aspect perfects. But that's all about waking up, right? And if we take 2026 as the kind of, I guess the literal square to 2020 in the astrology then, we had 2020. We had the kind of heavy Capricorn Saturn in a good position, overtones, and the change to how we were for a good couple of years, and then probably 2022 to 2025, everything's just sort of a little bit blur in Australia. I don't know, Lance, what's been your read on that 3 years from 2022 to 2025?
Definitely been a blur, and there's been a lot of, I feel there's been a lot of people like not looking at what happened. Blind eye to everything. Let's just get on with it. Like, we got fucked over, but let's not talk about it. That I was going to say is that part of what this Saturn Neptune thing could be, is as we wake up to ourselves of where we've let different people and influences lead us astray, that maybe we harden up a little bit as a country of stand up for different beliefs a bit more.
No.
Damn it. Come on.
No, this is I mean, I think as a people...
Maybe it sows the seed that starts?
I think with the people we start to see, that seed kind of starting to germinate, because it was sown in 2020, but it was sown so fucking deep that it's had a bit of a pathway to get above the surface. And I think what we get in 2026 is good conditions for little seeds to germinate. But at a national level, right, using these ingress charts relative to the federal government, absolutely not. We don't see the people being involved other than in a repressed function, basically, right? Which is, we're kind of kept in the dark. We're the mushrooms of the political apparatus, kept in the dark and fed on bullshit. And that's kind of reflected a lot in these ingress charts in Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, and Libra. So I feel like it's more, looking at the big apparatus that governs the country. It's the same old story, which is, feed the people a load of bullshit, monitor their movements, restrict their movements where you can, and we'll probably see some kickback against that, because I do feel like there'll be restrictions on transport or difficulties with transport in the first 4 months of 2026. But, in terms of a people to be governed and the mechanisms by which the government, which is what we're looking at, governs the people, which is a part of that structure, it's going to be pretty heavy-handed. And that's going to be part of that wake-up call. So number one, we get woken up around Aries ingress time, a little bit beforehand actually, by the dream just coming to an end, that kind of narcotic Piscean, Neptune and Saturn in Pisces, everything being very difficult to enforce, the boundaries between self and other being blurred, and, you know, self and reality being blurred by the rise of things post-COVID, like, you know, I guess, you know, social media just going ape shit, and artificial intelligence falling into that technological maelstrom, and seeing social media and technology as an instrument of control by governmental structures, or the people who run the governmental structures. And we get woken up from that, right? A little bit. And we're like, holy shit, it's 2026. And, you know, reality has come to live with us a little bit. And, you know, we start to see all of this kind of legislative scrambling for that first sort of 6 to 9 months of the year, which aims to keep the people in the dark, as always, to make legislation that, you know, while on the surface appears to take into account a fraction of what the people want democratically, underneath is really just controlled by shadowy figures, you know, as part of bigger transnational structures and things like whatever it is, AUKUS or whatever we're called, you know, that's sort of what's really in charge. The people themselves, whether they wake up or not, may not actually matter that much to how the nation governs itself, because there's been a lot of disconnect between the government's oversight and the reality of people living here. And that's had some positives. As always, I like to reference illegal tobacco in these podcasts, and, like, you know, dairies are unbelievably cheap at the moment. Good-o. That's probably going to come to an end. But it's one of those kinds of dreamy manifestations of Pisces and the movement from Neptune and Saturn out of Pisces into Aries, where bubbles get popped, right? Saturn, Neptune, and most definitely Saturn, Neptune, with Mars steamrolling over the two of them in mid-April, is the bubble buster par excellence. You know, on a selfish level, I hope that translates to the property market. I'd like to afford a house before I die. But there's other ways in which bubbles that are built on a disconnection to reality are just going to start to burst. And I think it's an outside force that comes in to burst that. Hence the emphasis on the fourth house and the land, and that struggle to immediately defend that kind of massive landmass that we have here. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm still going to hold hope that maybe this is enough bullshit that people start to, like, question things, that
Yeah, that's fair.
future years finally become easier.
That's fair. That's fair. Look, I mean, in terms of the people, just going back to our lived experience of being in Australia in the first 9 months of next year, you know, we're kind of going, I feel like we're going to be left alone so long as we kind of adhere to a couple of pretty strict pieces of legislation.
Yeah.
And that space where, you know, administrative and governmental oversight, even down to the level of policing and the police force and how we police, you know, each other within the nation, there's still going to be a focus shifted elsewhere. I would say more so engendering a kind of space where people can start to make their own ways rather than collectively, but just kind of individually and in groups to resist and to kind of find ways to resist. I mean, we're entering a state, I think, this year where surveillance of the people is quite strong and starts to get, like, hyperactive. But that's also an invitation to resist in ways that can kind of circumvent surveillance. So mass upheaval, no, we're not there yet, right? But, you know, smaller pockets of people meeting clandestinely, particularly within the lens of Saturn and Neptune in Aries, there's an element of Fight Club about this. And interestingly, I've had Fight Club come up in about 3 or 4 conversations with various groups of people, totally unconnected. And it seems like Fight Club is kind of enjoying a bit of a moan at the moment.
I think it's just people look at you and want to punch you in the face.
Probably. It's the mustache. I love it. It's not going anywhere.
Good. It needs to stay.
As a man in my 40s, I'm entitled to a free mustache. But look, I mean, you know, Fight Club seems to be sort of bubbling up as one of those cultural artifacts that might be indicative of those first couple of months of Saturn and Neptune both together in Aries. And I have my reasons, but I just want to know what you think about that to start off with.
My first thoughts when you're saying that was, well, the illegal chop shop's going to disappear, but, like, neighbouring people are going to start to grow their own tobacco.
Yeah.
And share it with each other.
Yeah.
And then yeah, maybe they've got to have a fisticuffs to see who gets to roll first.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. You
Props light. Who misses out?
know, no, it's I think what we have just on a deeper level with Fight Club. Like I'm actually serious about Fight Club being the fucking maison scene of 2026 for Australia. My memory of Fight Club, and it's been a while since I've watched it. I'm going to watch it again tonight. Is that you've got groups of disaffected and frustrated men, particularly, but I think this is open to all. But in the movie, it's disaffected and frustrated men who meet clandestinely to kind of try and form an identity and generate cultural capital in opposition to and outside of the corrupt capitalist system in which Fight Club is set, right? So
Absolutely.
it's not pretty. We're not entering into a pretty time, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it ain't going to be pretty, and unfortunately, that's kind of going to be the aesthetic. So we get this return to a very kind of DIY aesthetic. So do it yourself. That's very Aries, right? And DIY in terms of generating cultural capital outside of systems of control, that kind of grows in this strange sort of, I guess, rhizomal way into a kind of movement that sort of has some political clout and against which the governmental structures are going to have to make some sort of response. And I feel like initially that will be, let's pretend it doesn't happen and continue feeding a line of bullshit about a reality that doesn't exist. And then eventually in 2027, probably clamping down a little bit more and funneling all the disaffected youth, and particularly the young men, onto big army trucks and sending them off to a war somewhere else, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's another big aspect of Fight Club is the people not saying anything about something obvious. Like the whole reason why he started writing the book was he turned up to work with his face all beat up, and nobody asked him about it.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the seed of the idea of it. And then like well, if anybody needs a spoiler for it now, you've waited too long to watch Fight Club, where at the end, and it's giving away the secret, and he's like beating on himself. People are observing that and still following the guy. So they're not calling him on the weird bullshit. They're just going, okay, let's play.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can, from everything you've said, I can see an element of that as like people starting to wake up to see there's something going on here, but we're not game to talk about it yet.
Exactly. And leaders and authority figures, because Saturn represents authority. So does Jupiter in a sense, and that's more religious, spiritual authority. But in terms of authority figures, it's not about finding someone who's perfect, right? Saturn's in Aries, okay, right? So your authority figure is a pissed off old man with a sideways cap that someone's just put on an e-scooter or whatever it is, right? But authority figures, not so much. Broad casted authority figures, as in people who kind of appear as influencers or people of note that have a very broad reach on social media, they're probably going to fall by the wayside with the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in Aries, as people start to kind of find some way of imagining Neptune, a future that's kind of got a structure that's more in their own hands, which is that Saturn Aries component. And so, the main character in Fight Club, I've seen him dissected 5 ways from Sunday, to be honest with you, in terms of what the movie's about. I've heard people say it's about spiritual awakening in the face of severe mental illness. I disagree with that. It's more like, here's somebody who's just insane enough to wake us all up out of the dream that we've been in. And maybe it's going to take someone punching themselves in the face in the middle of a disused warehouse in like Islington or somewhere, who knows, right? Just to kind of get people to go, you know what, fuck it. So we're not going to be good in our choice of authority figures, but we're definitely going to go with the one who's able to inflict the most violence, right? And that's another thing too about 2026. The strong leader, not necessarily the experienced leader, the younger leader is going to start to come into focus with Saturn in Aries. And, how that happens initially, I reckon it's got a Fight Club vibe to it, which is just a fever dream that kind of has this impact on other people, led by a madman or two, but not one that you are going to see on Instagram or TikTok.
Yeah. Well, Australia's good with madmen.
Yeah, we do all right. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you'd said about like one more chart after that, back to Cap one?
Yeah, let's have a look. So Libra has Sagittarius on the ascendant, right? So that mutable ascendant means that the chart itself is good for 6 months. But why don't we just have a look at Capricorn 2026 just to see how we round out the calendar year? And of course, we've got Saturn ruling the sun, Capricorn. We've got Saturn ruling the ascendant this time from the 4th fucking house, mind you. Right? So we're back. We haven't really left the 4th house. We haven't left home next year, right? And that's got some pretty ominous overtones, yeah? So we've got Sun in Capricorn. We've got Moon in Taurus, 29 degrees. This is kind of a chart that I didn't really want to look at too deeply, just because we've got, we've got sort of Saturn in Aries completed its first retrograde, getting towards the end of the year, and, ruling the Sun in the 1st house, ruling the ascendant from the 4th house. We're stuck at home, right? But we've also got the people represented by the Moon in the 5th house, and it's 29 degrees of Taurus, the Moon, and it's forming a separating trine to the ascendant. But 29 degrees of Taurus and, anywhere up to and including 2 degrees of Gemini, which is where Uranus is, just over the border in the 6th house, that's where the Pleiades are, right? So we've got, and you and I are both very familiar with the Seven Sisters. But we've got the Moon with the Pleiades, and we've got sort of the military force represented by Mars at the point of Australia's Mars return, because we've got Mars in the 2nd decan of Virgo. We've got Mars in the 1st decan of Virgo here. Our military is deployed overseas, right? In sort of December onwards, we're going to see military deployment overseas. And we're going to see foreign military in Australia as a result of that. So there'll be some deployments overseas from all nations that we're friends with. I think we're going to see that military presence in Australia kind of a part of the landscape now towards the end of next year, and our own military going overseas as well. And the people at 29 Taurus, ordinarily with the Pleiades, just like with Algol, there's positive uses for the Pleiades, and then there's significations of the Pleiades, right? And so to take Algol as an example, something that some of your listeners may be familiar with, Algol is the most malefic star in the sky, except when you use it as a protective charm, and then it becomes the most protective charm. The Pleiades is good for magic, it's good for divination, but there are implications historically with this fixed star cluster that aren't great, right? That kind of represent a little bit, I think the Chinese astrology has a particular kind of interpretation of the Pleiades, which is the pile of corpses, right? And we see the Pleiades represented even in Greek mythology, and earlier mythologies as associated with death and dying, right? So I don't even know if you want to keep this in the forecast. I think the grimmest part of 2026 is right at the fucking end, when we enter into 2027, kind of in a warlike state, mate, right? Where we're having to collectively deal with, as a people, the impacts of 2026 and the very short road that it represents towards war in a global context. And I feel like that's kind of, next Christmas is not going to be great, right? Like, just, it's not good. It's not good. It's not
but this will be the chart we start on when we chat again next year with the extra context anyway, won't it?
It will. And look, I will never be happier to be proven wrong than if all of this just equates to some sort of small scale, the other interpretation of this, of course, is that there's violence at home. And you mentioned Australian, strongmen. And the last time we had Saturn in Aries, that was kind of the legislative changes around Port Arthur. And we had, Uncle Ivan doing his thing as well. And we had a number of violent incidents around the home that changed the legislative landscape. So there is that possibility that at the same time as the entire world is going crazy in March, April, we have some sort of event at home that forces us to change how we legislate violence within the country. I don't think so personally. And, as a second prize, I wouldn't be, chuffed to receive that as an accurate prediction. I'm actually hoping that everything I've said turns out to be absolute, rot and is not in any way accurate, because it's not a good year.
No, it doesn't sound like a great year. Maybe it's just our troops are overseas and other troops here for like swapping like training exercises, just like foreign exchange student program for war.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that wouldn't be so different to the way it works. We have military exercises up north, but I don't know, man. I'm seeing billeting. I'm seeing showgrounds and footy ovals being repurposed as makeshift camps and stuff like that. Kind of a little bit of an echo of that 1940s, 1930s vibe in Australia. But yeah, look, I just hope that this is all, none of this comes to pass. Very, very happy to be proven wrong. But a lot of the markers that I'm seeing just kind of point towards this big eruptive event, the dream coming to a very quick and sharp close, and the way that we govern this just changing. And for all intents and purposes, taking a bit of Edward Norton with our Brad Pitt for next year, for this year, sorry, for 2026.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so if people are stressed now and they want to know this more on a personal level, they can get a reading with you to find out how this actually affects them rather than the country.
Yeah, why not? Folks, if this has made you excited and hungry for more, come and see me. Dragonstoneastrology.com. Book a reading. I've got a special at the moment for the rest of January, which is an hour-long year ahead forecast incorporating tarot and astrology. And that's $150. That's quite a bargain. So go to Dragonstone Astrology for some similar good news.
Yes.
On a serious note, today I've been doing year ahead readings. I do readings on a Friday, and I've had about 7 of these in a row. So I'm coming in hot of looking at the ways in which 2026 impacts people in different ways. And so as a nation, we've got a pretty shithouse year ahead, but I've had nothing but positive readings with people today, basically. And where those challenges represented by these, kind of planetary shifts in energies are problematic, they're not problematic in such a way that's kind of catastrophic. So don't mistake a mundane political analysis of 2026 for how your life is going to be next year. It can be better. I'm not even using that as a plug. This is just like a PSA, a public service announcement. Don't get too depresso. It all varies based on your particular chart and how that sort of works with the astrology.
Yes, I can give feedback. One of those people that you just saw was one of my friends who sent me a message before she even knew I was about to get on here with you, saying she had a reading with you, and it was great. It was helpful, and you did one for me on my birthday back in August, and stuff has been happening that fit what you said, and you said my year would be great from that point on, in the middle of all of this shit. So I'm not stressed.
Cool. Cool bananas.
But I can attest to the value of a reading with Matt. Yeah. And you don't just have readings, you also make some talismanic jewelry.
Yeah. So I make talismanic jewelry, and I make astrological talismans, which is a kind of magical practice that takes particularly poignant astrological moments and kind of distills those into a talismanic form. So I make jewelry out of those, so pendants, necklaces, etc. I still have quite a few Jupiter in Cancer talismans from a phenomenal election earlier in the year available. So if you're after a bit of good luck amidst all of this, do check those out. But importantly, I'll be releasing a lot of protection talismans over the next couple of months as well to kind of help ward off the bad vibes of 2026. So there's talismanic stuff as well. I also teach astrology and tarot through tutorials, and I've just written a book as well called Tarot for the Spiritual Seeker. It's coming out. It's going to come out on the Cazimi, on the Mars Sun Cazimi. That's happening in about a week or so. So, keep an eye out for that as well. Basically, go to dragonstoneastrology.com, and that's the best place to start.
There'll be links below.
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
And if you've enjoyed this, listen back to the prior episodes. Matt's been on. He's like the most revisited guest. But some of them are just this, which are past years that you won't need to hear. I recommend the first half of the episode of the read on Australia. It was incredibly fascinating. And as you mentioned, the Pleiades. We have a Pleiades talisman set out that we did together that
Yes.
I think there's still a few left of that people can snatch up.
Absolutely. They're going fast. A lot of people want to know what's going to happen. And the talisman set that we did, which includes, I think, 7 hours of pendulum instruction from your good self, Lance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Depth class.
You'll find no better talisman for divination and magical practice. So get in while they're still available. They're going pretty quick.
Well, thanks for coming back again, Matt. And I'm sure we will talk again many times before this time next year. And maybe I'll find some other excuse to introduce you to everybody again in between then for something separate.
Lovely. That's I'd like to say it's been a pleasure, but it kind of has and hasn't, if you know what I mean.
Well, at least we've had a laugh about it. And it's better to be prepared. One of my mates always says, if you know somebody's going to punch you in the face, you're less likely to actually get hit in the face.
Perfect 2026 analogy, mate.
Well, thank you again.
No worries at all, man. Take it easy.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and perhaps learned something new. If you did, I'd love for you to subscribe or drop a review on whatever favourite podcast you have, or if you've been enjoying the video versions on YouTube or Facebook, do it there. If something really did click home for you with this episode, perhaps it could benefit one of your friends or family. If so, it'd really help if you shared this on your social medias. Until next time, you've been listening to Akasha Talks with Lance Baker.